Tank aggro is a joke. Blizzard, please fix this. I've been saying it for a while now. Tanking is not what it was. Certainly not what it was in Legion. It's not even what it was pre-Dragonflight. Tanking has been nerfed into the ground. And there's a problem right now in the game with tanking, and that nobody is playing tank. The only people left playing tank are really the Giga Chads of Giga Chads. You're looking at one right now. I only play Blood DK, and I'll continue to do so no matter what Blizzard does to us. But the truth is, you are squishy. You can't hold aggro, and your DPS is mostly a limp dick noodle. So the thing is, there is no fun left in tanking. At least when you couldn't do DPS, you were nearly immortal. I mean, at least when you couldn't maybe be immortal, you could hold aggro and just feel like, all right, I'm protecting the group. Now it's like you don't get to do anything. Like, tanks are not good at anything anymore. They're just kind of a trickster of not being good at any trade. It's kind of sucks. Anyways, Blizzard needs to fix this. I've been saying it for a while. Let's see what Marcellian has to say about this, how this is bullshit and how Blizzard needs to fix tanking.
Hey, what up? Listen, YouTube. Tank aggro
Cry
is
more.
bullshit. And this is part of a much larger problem with tanks that even got prominent. Mythic Plus extraordinaire WoW player and WoW content creator Dorky disqualified from last week's MDI, and I don't...
Dorky got disqualified from the MDI? For what? Team Goated, what is this? Utilize non-approved items that breaks the rules of the tournament during several of their runs. As a result, the following affected runs have been disqualified and removed from the team's overall score. Plus 21, plus 20, plus 18, Dark Flame class. What did he do? Did he use an item that helps him hold aggro? Damn.
think it was his fault. From
Dorky's my alt too, that's crazy.
Season 2 is doing a lot of great things right, like a lot. But there's still one area where it's currently still sucking.
Yeah, potion of shocking disclosure. So he was using something to try to hold... It's a problem, guys. For real, I tried... There used to be a time where you could literally just blood boil and run, and everything would stay on you. Now if I do that, if any single one of the DPS starts targeting the ads while I'm running, I'm losing aggro in a second. There's no way I can hold it. It is a problem right now in the game.
Well, probably more than one area, but this particular one is making tanks go extinct. And
yeah, so he had a ticking AoE pulse to try to cause extra damage to hold the aggro. That's what it was.
Giving you 45-minute queue times to find the tank, or maybe not 45, but you're likely not getting into dungeons because there's not enough tanks for people. Probably not enough healers as well, but that's a topic for a different video. The tank issue has to be resolved, and hopefully we can fix WoW with this, because not having tanks being incentivized to play the game is not anything new. It has proven to be a big problem for last season when we had a shortage of tanks and healers, because it was a very difficult season to actually be a tank in. This time around it's a little bit easier, but arguably still a big problem to find enough tanks and healers in the game, because their gameplay is way more punishing, it involves way more responsibility, and people don't want to do it because they will be flamed in chat. And be on the receiving end an unfortunate amount of toxicity. Yeah. And in order for them to want to play...
Like, what's the incentive of being a tank in a Mythic Plus other than, okay, you're going to try to get the gear, right? That's why you're there. But it being a tank in a Mythic Plus versus a DPSer, you're certainly, you're like on the board to get cussed out more. You're on the board to get bitched out more. Everyone's going to blame you for wipes. Everyone's going to blame you for not doing the tanking path correctly. They're going to blame you. Even if the DPS wipes due to them not doing mechanics, they're going to blame you for it. Like, yes, you are the punching bag for everybody. And at least when you used to be the punching bag, you didn't feel it, because you were an immortal tank who could just freaking do shit on his own almost at some points. Whereas now, you're a weak little bitch, and you're being bitched out. So yeah, there's no incentive or fun in being a tank. You'd rather just go DPS that shit and not have to deal with all the extra mechanics from your group, right? Oh yeah, tanking a Mythic Plus sucks cock. It does. It does. And the reason I know that nobody's tanking anymore is literally I jumped into this Mythic Plus season like midway through. I had a horrible IO, and I'm still getting invited to plus 10s, which means that like people are in literal desperation at this point. Whereas, like, before I would queue up, and if my IO wasn't ratching what they wanted, I just wouldn't get in. Now I'll get it. If I queue up, I'm almost getting insta invites. I have no resume to prove that I can do any of this shit, and people invite me anyways. That shows how desperate things have become.
The game, or for more people to gravitate towards these roles, we need to incentivize them to do so. And maybe if we get this video in the hands of the devs, we can actually have our voices heard and our struggles answered, unless you think I'm wrong, in which case you can leave a comment down in the description below after you like and subscribe to this channel. Shameless plug. Well, let's get back to the topic at hand with tank aggro. So what exactly happened last week in the MDI, which it's Mythic Dungeon Invitational, Mythic
Oh, so he's
Dungeon
gonna tell us what
International,
happened.
Mythic Dungeon Intentional, something like that, where people essentially form teams, group up, and then just duke it out in Mythic Plus competition where they push keys higher and higher and higher to get more and more score. What did our boy lovely tank Dorky do? He essentially used the potion that exists in the game from alchemy that once you pop it, you emanate waves of little trickles of damage around you.
Right.
To, in the hopes of what he was trying to accomplish, gather mobs easier while pulling into the dungeon to build up threat, because it's so difficult to build threat if you want to push dungeons. We're gonna get to those issues in particular.
It is a problem.
Now, the way this works with Mythic Plus is sometimes if you pop some potions before the timer reaches its conclusion and you actually start the dungeon, if you pre-pot or pre-use some of the cooldowns, you get to keep them as the dungeon starts, and then they get reset because once a key starts, all of your cooldowns are reset. And with that, you can use an extra additional potion. Now, that's not necessarily a problem because he could have just as well popped the potion after the dungeon timer started, but he probably used the DPS potion for that particular pool. Competition, big damage, we all know that jazz.
Right.
But he needed that to be able to gather enough mobs and keep aggro on them as his team was following.
He's still losing aggro. Even with the pot, you can see it, right? He's losing aggro on some mobs.
His team was following him and trying to accomplish the key and what they essentially were going to do.
Because it's impossible.
And why would he use that? Obviously, the quick answer is, well, it's competition, bro. We use every little bit of edge. That's true, but that has to be used because of a different problem. Because otherwise, he would have used a DPS potion, something that gives you agility or crit or mastery or whatever you want to get you to do more damage out there. He used that potion because he needs all the help he can get to maintain aggro. And I have experienced this on a lot of the tanks so far. I haven't played with all of them, and some of them don't really have this issue because
Blood
they're
is
just
horrible.
overtuned in terms of damage. But it's no surprise that this season's tank DPS has been at an all-time low. And now we're getting to the issue at hand.
Blood has gotten better with AoE, like you can actually do some decent damage on AoE pulls. The problem is the rest of the DPS, if you have certain classes in your group, their AoE damage is just off the charts insane. And you really can't hold it, so they'll just start pulling single mobs. Like so you'll have to death grip one or two mobs every once in a while to keep everyone on you.
DPS is incredibly low. Now, there is an argument to be made about tanks essentially liking to deal big DPS, because why wouldn't you? That is really fun, but we can argue, we can agree to disagree that that's a good thing for the game. That's not really what's important. What's important is that
the numbers are
tanks
just too
do
high.
enough damage to keep aggro. That's one of the first things you want, particularly in Mythic Plus, because in raids is not usually an issue. That can happen an issue if the difference in damage between tanks is too high, where one tank that's not tanking the boss, that shouldn't be tanking the boss, rips aggro from the current tank and gets another stack of a tank debuff that he's not supposed to get, that eventually kills him. That's also a problem, and that usually gets fixed by Blizzard generally tuning the single target DPS of tanks a little bit more evenly. When it comes to AoE though, it's a whole different story. Now, there are a bunch of issues why tank aggro is a problem this season, and I won't go into all of them because I might not know all of them, but the ones that I do know are very obvious. And
I will say too, part of what's hurting tank DPS overall and affecting how you hold aggro is the fact that now tanks are so much more squishy. You're trying to survive a lot more. You're spending more time trying to survive and less time actually working through your DPS rotation, because you will get the shit beat out of you. If you're not constantly damage mitigating, if you're not even on just like pulls that were considered to be easy, you didn't even have to pop a single defensive to survive them, that doesn't exist anymore. Now you're always popping defensives, you're always self-healing, you're always trying to damage mitigate, because if you don't, you're gonna fucking die. Because Blizzard decided back in Dragonflight that tanks shouldn't be tanky anymore, that they should be squishy little bitches like everyone else.
it's likely that you have encountered them as well. And if you lost aggro to some DPS,
there probably will be a stat
there's two
squish
reasons as
scar.
to
You're
why
right.
that happened, and they're not mutually inclusive. So I guess mutually exclusive. One of them is that you're bad. So let's explore that for a second. I
Oh Jesus.
have a problem with
Oh,
this.
chat's gonna love this one. Damn it.
term bad, being a bad player, because player skill, the way I see it, is a spectrum in World of Warcraft. It's relevant to the context that you're in.
Sure.
You cannot really be a bad player in world content if you just do questing. You just hit the mob dies. You can be a bad player if you go into a plus 15 in Mythic Plus and hit the same ability and not pop a defensive and you die. But since that's all relative, it's basically based on the context. The problem is that being bad at the thing is something that...
Being bad was always a problem, right? If you suck at your class, okay, it's going to be a problem. The problem is now it's completely unforgiving. Whereas before, like, you could survive certain things, you could handle certain things as a tank. Now tanks can't survive anything. So if you're bad, quote unquote bad, and you make a single mistake, it's a wipe. There is no chance you're surviving a mistake anymore. Those days are long gone. You need to be perfect to survive as a tank.
Work through. It's something that, you know, eventually goes away once you play enough. The problem is that if you have an issue that wasn't an issue, even though you're playing the same class, the same spec, with the same rotation, then we have a problem. Then essentially you can say that in this season, tank threat has become a new mechanic that tanks need to engage with.
It is.
And now we go to the second part of that problem. Tank threat is indeed an issue, and this is why I believe so. And I will give the devil its due.
It's an issue.
I think tank threat should be a mechanic that exists in the game. Otherwise, we end up with situation like, what was it, BFA or early Shadowlands, where tanks would do so much instant burst damage that they would have infinite aggro on the mobs, and they can just run around and never take damage because the mobs will never attack the DPS players. That would be a very terrible way to play the video game, and very terrible way to play tanks, because that would essentially make it sure that everybody can push higher keys, since the tanks don't ever die. And we had that world before. We don't want to have that world again. It's not very fun. Now, tank threat should be something that players engage with, and fine-tuning exactly where that should be is indeed a balance issue. There are also other issues that come to play. First of all, let's talk about Vengeance Demon Hunter, my newest experience tanking 10s, 11s, and 12s the other day.
The ultimate meta tank, Vengeance Demon Hunter. Jesus.
Well, it was yesterday as I'm recording this, but it's probably last week when you're seeing this. And I had probably the most amount of threat issues almost ever, with the exception of maybe Brewmaster. Now, Vengeance Demon Hunter is a meta tank. Vengeance Demon Hunter is, I believe, the tank that maybe Dorky used in the MDI as well. Definitely the meta tank that was used to push the highest of the keys in MDI. So you would think that these types of issues don't affect it. Well, Vengeance Demon Hunter has been the prominent recipient of insane amount of bugs related to threats, which over the course of the season so far have been fixed, from what I understand, most of them, maybe all of them. And in that case, then this is an even bigger problem. So what is the issue then? Well, it could be the low amount of damage that the skills give, and part of the bigger problem with WoW's design is the synergy between the skills. Vengeance Demon Hunter builds up a lot of damage with synergizing its abilities. You can spread your fiery brand onto many other targets for the defensive purposes, but that also increases the fire damage that you eventually do. And if you pop Sigil of Flame and then Immolation Aura essentially extends the fiery brand and extends Sigil of Flame, which Sigil of Flame is a big part of your overall damage and a big part of your overall threat. Now, these abilities are essentially a combo, and once you pop Fiery Brand, it has to spread to a bunch of targets, and with that, you essentially pop Sigil of Spite and then Sigil of Flame, but you have to wait a little bit for that to spread to be able to do enough damage. Now, obviously, if you wait that long, which is what I did, because I read the tooltip of the abilities, and I thought, oh,
that's the thing. Yeah, maybe he holds aggro if he waits, right? You're deeper into the fight, you can hold aggro better. It's never usually a problem towards the back end of the fight. It's the initial pull. That's where the major problem is, because you just can't pop off hard enough to hold the aggro, and that's when you start to lose it.
Increases the fire damage that I do.
Why is he giving my Demon Hunter tank
fire damage abilities when most enemies have this debuff on, so I can do the most amount of damage
prefacing
to be an efficient tank and to be able to essentially hold aggro, was my thought process. But boy, was I wrong, because that's not how you should play. There are different ways of pulling with Vengeance Demon Hunter to make sure that threat isn't an issue, one of which is to pull at range and get all the mobs to come towards you, and then pop Fell Devastation. This is a common issue or a common solution to this problem that people have been using and employing this entire season. It's not necessarily a bad solution, but it does forego some intuitive gameplay on Vengeance. So new players that get into Vengeance might not figure this out, because what Vengeance does have as abilities when pulling a target? Well, you have Infernal Strike.
So basically, if you do the rotation correctly, you're not going to get to hold damage. You're not going to hold aggro, I mean. Interesting. Yeah, Vengeance Demon Hunter is by far the easiest to hold threat on. Threat generation for other tanks needs to be as easy as Vengeance Demon Hunter. Really, I mean, he's saying it was tough. But, I mean, what he's saying is you can't do the rotation properly, because if you do, then you won't hold aggro. But I guess this way, it's not a problem.
And if you Infernal Strike into a pack, you die. So you have to Infernal Strike and deal damage. Then you want to throw Glaive.
I've already had this conversation on stream. Vengeance Demon Hunter is the easiest tank to play. It's established.
The entire dungeon.
AI confirmed
So how
it
exactly are you supposed to play right now when all of the intuitive abilities don't actually build the threat that you need or are AoE capped? And now we go to the second issue of the story, and that is Prot Warrior.
Ooh.
And this encompasses a bigger issue with tanks. Prot Warrior right now plays Colossus as the hero talent.
Nobody plays Prot
Now,
Warrior.
Colossus does the most amount of damage, and ironically, Thunderclap, which has been over the course of so many years the ability to do damage to enemies around you, to essentially gather them up, build up that threat and that aggro so you can start DPSing and, you know, roll your defensives up. Well, Thunderclap is tuned very, 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 very low for Colossus, so the damage that it does is so insignificantly small.
We looked at the numbers for Mythic Plus, and basically Prot Warrior was nowhere to be seen on any of the runs that have been happening. So nobody's playing Prot Warrior, or at least nobody running Mythic Plus.
Threats to keep aggro on from players that are, let's say, equally geared as you and are just blasting their DPS cooldowns. And it's also capped. Well, tanks essentially are AoE capped, but they're kind of soft cap, where their damage gets reduced past 5 targets or past 8 targets, depending on the ability that you use. And that is essentially a problem, because you will always pull more than 5 minions, despite what the devs might want us to do in Mythic Plus. Nobody enjoys fighting 5 minions at a time. Maybe there's like that one group that does +5s or whatever key, and then they just like to take a chill, and that's fine. They have that freedom, but let us have the freedom of pulling more, because that is what's fun in the game. And if you do that, tanks will essentially start to lose out on the damage on the other mobs, because if I'm fighting 10 to 15 mobs and my ability starts to do less damage past the number 5 mob, then the other mobs will have less threat generated from me.
Right.
And when you have Balanced Druid with Starfall or Elemental Shaman with Earthquakes that are uncapped and are hitting everything giga hard, and that's fun, by the way, don't remove that, please, then I eventually just...
That's what Blizzard will do. That's what Blizzard will do. Instead of buffing the way a warrior or other tank classes play, they'll just nerf the other classes, because those classes are having fun. So maybe they'll just nerf them so they have less fun, and then everyone's just not having fun. That's typically what happens. Rather than what they should do is, buff AoE damage for tanks. So then tanks can actually hold some freaking aggro. I don't think this is a single target issue. It's the multi-target issue that's happening. Single target, the only time you really have an issue is... somebody popping off like before the timer goes down, or just tank swapping.
Lose
It's a
aggro
multi-target
that's
problem.
Just not good game design. Okay, I understand the capping of certain abilities. I understand that some abilities do uncapped damage because they're more difficult to use, or they have some intricacies or obstacles they need to overcome to be able to be used, like Earthquake. You have to have everything inside the Earthquake, and things move a lot of the time, so you will lose damage that way. So there's pros and cons to all of these. But tanks shouldn't have that issue. Threat shouldn't be a game design problem. Threat should be something that tanks should be aware of. Okay, I need to have aggro on all of these. I'm going to use my AoE abilities. But if you use your AoE abilities and you still don't have threat, then what are you then supposed to do? Then you probably panic like I do. And they're like, oh my god, I have to taunt that one, go to that one, charge to that one.
Yeah, and it just exacerbates the problem, because then you start, like I said, I got to death grip that one, taunt that one, bring that one back in, blood boil again. And what happens is you're doing that shit, and your DPS is dropping even further. So now you're having an issue where not only does like capping out your DPS not enough, you're losing DPS from that cap, and now you're just really starting to lose aggro everywhere. It becomes you start running around like a chicken with your head cut off. Way back in the day, the ancient times, I remember it running dungeons where you had to plan trash pulls. You sheep left, yeah, rogue, yep. You had to sap one, sheep one. There's Burning Crusade. That's where I remember that happening. You'd be running through a dungeon. You had to, every single pull had to be planned. You had to mark them all. Sheep one, sap one, get in. Yeah, those were good times. Or trap one with a hunter. Yeah, it was a different time back then. Oh, they just need to buff AoE threat. Yeah, damage is pretty healthy. If you don't want, yeah, well, they got to just change they just got to change the way DPS threat then works. They got to balance it out more to where you get more threat with less DPS. If you don't play with a Discord group, you're going to have some pop off and immediately choose between the defensives and gathering. Yeah.
Keep to that other one, and then I die because I have to use all of these other abilities to
Sam,
build
your
aggro
DPS
and
is
not
like
use
400.
my defensive abilities.
Not a multi-target. I just did a +10 on Friday, and I think the first pull, I pulled a big pull, I was doing like 6 mil DPS. No, you're talking 400k. Yeah, when I'm running and trying to gather up move a boss to certain specific spots in a raid. Okay, yeah, that's different.
Of course, there are tanks that are really good at the game and don't have that issue or have worked through that issue. And that is the, maybe you're bad at the video game thing. But then we go into the direction...
And by the way, at 6 mil DPS, I was losing threat on some mobs.
How good are you supposed to be at the video game to pop a big explosion around you and have things hit you because you did pop that big explosion around you? It's just not intuitive. And I've had plenty more issues with Brewmaster, and this is before it was...
Don't make shit up. I'll show you the meters when I log in today.
To be able to hold aggro, and even now, if I slip for 1 second and I don't use my DPS effectively, I lose aggro again. And I'm like maxed.
Again, it goes back to what I said earlier. If you are not playing perfectly as a tank, everything's going to fall apart. You're going to lose aggro. You're going to pull an extra mob. You're going to have DPS Dido mechanic. You're going to frontal the group. You're going to die. Obviously, dying is going to happen if you're not playing perfectly. You have to play perfectly. Whereas if DPS don't play perfectly, who gives a shit? What, they lose some DPS? If a healer doesn't play perfectly, that's right behind tank. You're gonna have some problems. Maybe somebody dies, but the rest of the group stays alive. One of the DPS dies. Okay, but if the tank dies, it's over. It's over. That's it. If the tank makes a mistake, the group's done. That's a high pressure situation. Some people just don't want to deal with that. That's why people won't play tank.
Gear with my Brewmaster, I'm 675.
Now, how do you offset that pressure? You can't change that. But what you do is you make tanking more fun to play. Right? You give them some decent AoE damage. You make holding aggro a little bit easier, and you just make them a little bit more immortal. That's what feels good about playing as a tank, when you feel like you just take anything and dish it back.
Right now, because I don't have any myth track items, but that's not important. But this is just another explanation and another reason why tanking is, I wouldn't say necessarily difficult. It is difficult, more than being a DPS for sure, but it is annoying and not intuitive. And people will face these issues. They will not really understand what the problem is. The solution to these issues is not very intuitive, and then they will just not want to tank anymore. They will feel tanking is a very demanding and high stressful job, and then we'll have fewer tanks, and that's not good for the health of the game at all.
No,
I don't know if this has been your experience, so please let us know in the comment section down below.
It's very bad for the health of the game. It just makes everybody sitting in queues longer, frustrations build. What is this? Oh, wow. Oh, so you drew a tank for me? Cadence, you drew a tank? Yeah, he's bald. Yeah. Yeah, so this is, your average tank, big, muscular man. I mean, you're looking at one right now. I am balding, so I'll be there eventually. But, Giga Chad's tank, of course. Everyone knows that. Everybody knows that.
Oh, how has your tanking experience gone? Or, as a DPS player, do you feel like you have enough tanks in the game for you to join groups and do dungeons and raids with? Or are tanks actually going extinct? I'm so upset, I cannot even pronounce right. But speaking of tanks and of vengeance, you gotta check our Vengeance and Discipline Priest video on the meta debate between Marcellian and I, where we throw out talking points at each other as to why these specs are so good, why you should play them, why they are meta, and maybe why you shouldn't play them if you don't really like them.
They are meta.
In this video, right here.
Cool, yeah, nice video. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Yeah, tanking's a problem right now. You probably have, I wish there was like a tanking numbers tracker. Guaranteed there are less people playing tank right now than, I would say ever. Maybe not ever, could be ever. But in a very long time, certainly. I can tell just by the way when I queue up for things, how easily I get invited to stuff, which is the one bonus of playing tank right now. If you want instant invites to content, play tank, you will get instantly invited. Whether you're good, whether you're bad, whether, you know, you're Greg from accounting who's never run a Mythic Plus dungeon, or you're somebody who runs them all the time, you're getting invited. Okay, so if you want to get invited, play tank. But also be prepared to get your cheeks clapped and literal asshole ripped apart, because that's going to happen too. Because that's what happens in every run, because people get pissed off at you. But a nice video from Marcelli, and hopefully Blizzard fixes tanking soon.